Guys, you're looking right into the live charts of both Lake Mead, Lake Mojave, and Lake Havasu. Now, these numbers have been disappearing and reappearing all day. I saw them early this morning, and then this entire bottom section disappeared. But it's starting to repopulate, some type of glitch. But what happened, guys, we reached record low right here this morning at 2 o'clock. That's Mountain Time right there. 10:40:57, 10:40:58 was the all-time low record. So it dropped just below it. And that's about the time all the glitching started. Again, it's coming back in and repopulating. But this number means something more than just a record low. We're starting to see the pressure on the hydro turbines at Mead drop, and we're starting to see the effects on the data centers, believe it or not. Let's talk about it. They call this ghosting, and it's exactly opposite of what you think it may be. But again, it is affecting the data centers, and it may end up having a long-term effect. And as of today, looking at the different grids in the desert Southwest and the ones that surround that, they're talking about something happening that's called the ghost blackouts or ghost drops. They're destabilizing the power grid, and they're caused by customer-initiated load reduction, CILR. In this instance, the customer is the data centers. This is a phenomenon where massive AI data centers instantly sever the connection to the public grid. What's happening is the grid is getting so weak, and they have so much sensitive data, they claim inside these centers that they cannot even take a 1 second or millisecond disruption. So when they see the grid lowering because Mead is lowering and the hydropower is lowering, they immediately switch. I'm sure it's AI controlled, but once you see a voltage level get into the dangerous area that it could affect the data centers, it immediately switches to backup battery. Now that can last for about 15 minutes, and that would give the diesel power generators time to kick on as long as they last. But this is very interesting to me because what we're seeing now, we're 5 feet from Lake Mead hitting almost zero hydropower outlets. 5 feet, probably 4 weeks. We nailed the date that this was going to happen as far as breaking the record. And again, I'm saying 4 weeks plus or minus, depending on the heat, us hitting 1035 and losing just about all the hydropower backup, guys, over 80%, and the water's still dropping. And they have to stop it because of cavitation. Powell's in trouble, Fontenelle's in trouble, and Flaming Gorge is in trouble. But anyway, what's happening, guys, this ghosting is when they cut the power from the grid to immediately change to a more sophisticated grid system or more level power system, kind of like a pure sine wave inverter, I guess you would call it. But they have to switch it immediately. So instead of it helping the grid, they see a surge back into the grid because they just killed a lot of power. When they cut the grid off and switch to their 15-minute backups, they create a surge throughout the rest of the season. Rest of the system, and this creates its own problems. And again, the data centers are quickly abandoning the grid to protect their own hardware. And what they're dealing with is highly sensitive, multi-billion-dollar GPU units. Guys, that's went from the central processing unit now to the GPU chips. And they learned that from the gaming industry, by the way. But anyway, if a minor completely normal voltage flicker, a power line failure, or a frequency wobble occurs anywhere on the regional grid, the data center's internal protection circuit detects it in microseconds, guys, and that is AI. To prevent the slight electrical spike from frying the computing equipment, the data center's automatic transfer switches instantly, drops the public grid connection, and shifts the facility over to localized private backup power systems. Again, you got about 15 minutes of battery backup, and these are huge batteries systems, guys, mega. Run your house for months, but they can only last about 15 minutes in the data center. And they're saying that will give the data center time to switch to the diesel generators again. But how long can you truck in diesel if you have a big power grid takedown like we could possibly see when Mead gets closer to 1035? Every foot of water droppage, and we're only 5 feet from that, creates a tremendous loss of hydropower. Now, there's a whiplash oscillation is what they call it when you change from one grid to the other, back and forth. And in less than a second, an immense amount of demand, often 1,000 to 1,800 megawatts of power consumption, completely vanishes from the grid. In other words, the data center has switched off the grid. Now, you would think that was a good thing, except, and it is a good thing, but except for the fact that it's putting and dumping a surge into the remaining grid. And it causes a frequency spike. Large regional power generation assets, such as spinning natural gas turbines or hydro dams, cannot reduce their physical power output that quickly. They keep pushing massive amounts of electricity into the grid, and it causes this surge. When the massive data center load's suddenly gone, the leftover electricity causes a violent, localized spike in grid frequency and voltage. This sudden surge can trip circuit breakers on neighboring lines, creating ghost blackouts for nearby businesses and residential neighborhoods that had absolutely nothing to do with the initial minor flicker. Do you see the control and the drain of the data centers, guys? And that's basically what the video is about, is regardless if what happens at this point, whether they leave them on or turn them off, the rest of us are getting these ghost blackouts. And I've mentioned the cushion of hydropower before. It says this issue is amplified in regions like the Southwest due to the loss of the large hydro buffers like Hoover Dam. Traditional grids relied on the heavy physical inertia of giant spinning turbines to naturally dampen the voltage wobbles. And think about that, those massive giant turbines grinding through, instantly generating electricity. They're vanishing. But as the grid shifts towards solar, wind, and electronic inverters, it loses that physical shock absorber, making the power lines much more reactive and prone to the tiny flickers that scare data centers into dropping offline. Again, it's AI control, and I see the mechanics and the reasoning of the physics of how they do it, but they're not looking at the overall effect on how it affects everyday life in America. They actually don't care. But it's going to come back to catch them, because we're seeing now when they have to switch, they're killing the system that maintains them through normal operations. In other words, you start getting blackouts and things like that, power surges. When they do try to come back online, they're going to have a weakened system. Now, but in the meantime, we've got to deal with the damage to the grids. Now, it's not just grid power that the data centers are draining, guys. It's also our water supply. Now, this picture is from the National Park Service, and it's looking at the convergence or the confluence of the Little Colorado River and the Colorado River itself. Here's the Colorado River, and this is up above the dams, and so it hasn't been flooded. And this is the Little Colorado River. Notice the difference in the color here. That's from the minerals that come out from what's called, the Hopi call the Sipapoo. And that is where they emerged after the last disaster. They came out from the springs. Now, what I found out is very interesting, because it's not just the data coming from here that is general information, but the data centers are looking into it very closely. And if you look at some of the images, it's beautiful water, but it's because of the minerals that make it that aqua clear beach color. And that opening is where the Hopis originally say that they came out of during the last great crisis. But what's happening, guys, is because the regular water is getting short, this is tied into what they're finding about the low level aquifers, the giant ones, the ones we don't normally tap into, and that these giant aquifers are around the world and they're interconnected. Not solid. I mean, you've got huge areas, and then you have rock basins in between them and cracks where the water goes from one aquifer to the other. But this is the deepest water in the world. And now what their data centers are trying to do is get into these red rock cliffs, and they have already started in drilling into the waters of the Colorado River, or the Little Colorado here. Again, this water is coming from the Sipapoo the emergence area of the Hopis. Now, the reason that they cherish it and that it is a holy place for them, not only was it where they came back to the surface, but it's an enriched mineral water like the water of life. But the data centers now are trying to tap into it. They've actually drilled into it in previous times and injected tons of dye to see where all the springs come up. And we've talked about the dams causing some of the springs of the native tribes to be covered. And that water pressure on top of these springs keeps them from bubbling up. And what it relates to, again, going to the very deepest aquifers on the planet, goes back to the ancient Sumerian story of the Abzu. And I'm going to do a separate video about that, but I just wanted to mention to you what they're trying to do to this beautiful location. And those waters are different than the waters in the Colorado River. That's rain and snow melt combined with pollution from agriculture. But these clear blue waters like you see here, again, look at the color. This is the little Colorado River, and it comes out of a mound that they say the Hopis developed their huts from the shape of that mound. But anyway, now the data centers are trying to tap into this ancient source of very deep water. I don't know if they're going to destroy it, take advantage of it, or whatever, but that's what they're trying to do. Now, I've got a more detailed video on who's drilling what and doing it, but this is critical that this particular spring be saved, because I mentioned that the seed would be saved. After all the damage of the desert has been done, and you see the decaying rivers and the depleting resources of the power grid and the marinas going into a rust pit, this is what would pull life back. This release of the deep waters of the deepest aquifers on the planet. And it surges up, and what they've noticed, and the reason they're tapping into it, is because they've noticed a surge in the pressure all of a sudden. And it began back in 2012. When, remember I showed you that's when the 13,000-year cycle started over. It wasn't the end, and it also matched the 13,000-year cycle of the Mayan calendar. Since that happened, we saw the ice sheets start to melt in 2012. Not as bad as they are now, but it was the beginning. And they noticed an increased pressure in these worldwide springs, like they're reemerging, because it's at the end of that cycle where they're going to be needed. I know it may sound strange, but I've got an entire video backed up for that. And I may put that on the Sumerian History channel. Watch for updates there. But I wanted to come in and talk to you about these ghost blackouts. And it is a positive thing in the overall run, because it will eliminate most of the data centers. Remember I mentioned the Q chip that Google has? And what that is one that doesn't need the water and the heat that the big GPU chips need. If there's a surviving information center like that, it will be Google, it will be Meta, because of those new chips. Now that's an interesting story in itself, and how that ties back into the ancient computers of the Sumerians. But we're watching it, guys. You watch it. It's a heads up. You guys be safe.